I would like to dedicate this talk to Brad Tomberline, a very good friend and colleague. Brad was killed on September 15, 2019, in Ecuador while performing a routine helicopter airborne geophysical survey in a helicopter provided by the client. Brad and the pilot were killed instantly when their aircraft crashed after striking an illegal mining zip line. The civil aviation authorities in Ecuador have yet to report on the cause of the accident, but our investigation regrettably leads us to believe that the crash was pilot error, as flight data indicates that the aircraft was flying well below the planned flight height while entering a survey line. New-Sense Geophysics has focused on collecting high-quality data in the safest possible manner. Although New-Sense operates in all environments, over the last 15 years, the largest portion of its work has been on projects in mountainous environments. We have flown over 180 projects, of which 80 are at altitudes over 3,000 meters. These high-altitude mountainous surveys typically are flown at survey altitudes between 3,000 to 5,800 meters above sea level, and are usually in the range of between 3,500 and 4,500 meters above sea level. For these projects, the bases of operations have been as high as 4,200 meters, but we try to keep the bases at or below 3,100 meters for reasons that we will explore further. A quick look at these two charts prepared by IAXA should make it clear that airborne geophysical surveys are dangerous and sometimes lethal work. In the period 1993 to 2018, there have been 27 fatal accidents, with the loss of 54 lives. Incident reporting has dramatically increased over the last 9 years as companies try to help each other by drawing attention to weaknesses. The number of deaths over the last 9 years has been halved with respect to the previous 9 years. The accident's causes are characterized by IAXA in descending order as loss of power, controlled flight into ground, unknown, loss of control, wire strike, landing gear, procedure, weather. And of course, pilot error is always a consideration. These are the direct causes. Now let's look at the risks that produced these accidents. There are many risks in performing airborne geophysical surveys, particularly in high mountainous terrain. The extreme altitude and rugged nature of the survey areas produces many risks. This slide lists some of the risks in no particular order, of which we will consider in this talk. Reduced oxygen levels, fatigue, power/performance of helicopters at high altitudes, helicopter and equipment choices, obstacles, fuel quality, community issues, survey terrain clearance, weather, aircraft survey velocity, crew experience, flight planning, daily routine and checks, and safety awareness. Reduced oxygen intake at altitude produces many health issues: dizziness, fatigue, loss of energy, shortness of breath, loss of appetite, sleep problems, and vomiting. More sinister, though, as it is usually not apparent to us, is the decline in some of our more sophisticated cognitive skills. This is due to the effect of reduced oxygen levels on the function of the brain. From the chart, you can see that if one stays below 10,000 feet, risks associated with reduced oxygen levels is minimal. Between 10 and 12,000 feet, reduced oxygen levels are a risk, but this is usually mitigated by becoming accustomed to the height over a few days. Thus, our base camps are usually below 12,000 feet. Higher altitudes are where most of the flying takes place are dangerous without mitigation. Air density is reduced with altitude, therefore lift is reduced as you operate at higher altitudes. The graph on the left shows that in order to maintain a climb rate in an A-star 350B3 of about 1,600 feet a minute in flight, one has to reduce the fuel load dramatically to about 35% in order to survey with reasonable climb rates at 5,400 meters. Takeoff weight is also affected above about 3,800 meters and is not really practical above 5,000 meters, as seen in the right-hand slide. Icing is always a risk in freezing temperatures and needs to be carefully monitored. Low temperature at altitude produces a survival risk. The blue square in the image presented is the operating range in high mountain surveys. Most of the flying will be done with outside temperatures below freezing. If the aircraft is forced down during a survey, hypothermia and dehydration are life-threatening. Various helicopter platforms are used for airborne surveying. For mountain work, there is really only one helicopter for these types of surveys, and that is the A-star 350B3. Obstacles such as cables and towers are a constant risk. Flight heights must be chosen accordingly. Poor community relations can be a big risk in isolated mountain areas. These are pictures of helicopters destroyed by angry local residents. Fuel and its transport and storage is vital to a safe survey. Casual or uncertified fuel movement, storage, or handling can have fatal consequences. The top two pictures show an illegal remote fuel system setup in Peru. The bottom two shows a legal certified Peruvian remote fueling system. Each country has its own regulations, but the objective is to deliver clean, traceable fuel to the aircraft. This image shows typical Andes terrain with actual tight drape at 40 meters above ground. The effort to maintain good drape can lead to more risk if not mitigated, due to the potential loss of airspeed while climbing. Forward airspeed of less than 25 knots for sustained periods can make the helicopter difficult to manage. Weather conditions are a key risk factor. Poor or rapidly deteriorating weather has led to many accidents. Weather issues include high winds, updrafts, downdrafts, turbulence. Bad weather can also affect visibility caused by fog, clouds, rain, snow, sun glare, etc. Unexpected icing may also occur as the helicopter moves up and down through changing conditions. Other potential risks include pilot inexperience, poor flight planning, poor protocol for daily routines and checks, lack of safety awareness, etc. We will now look at the ways to mitigate these risks. These strategies include use of oxygen at altitude, selecting the right aircraft for the job, the use of a stinger system, pilot training, remote weather station, public sources of weather information, pre-project logistic scouting, public relations, pre-production reconnaissance flights, preparing a risk register, project fatigue risk assessment, flight planning, variable speed flying technique, flight characteristics monitoring, flight and vehicle following, transparency and stakeholder integration, emergency response plan, and safety management plan. The use of Canella oxygen systems, as shown in the photograph, must be used to reduce oxygen deficiency for the flight crew at flight altitudes above 10,000 feet. Careful monitoring of the crew at the base and auxiliary oxygen when needed is essential. Time to acclimatize at bases above 10,000 feet is also required. Eurocopter's A-Star 350B3 is the clear choice for this type of work. You will note that twin-engine aircraft are not suitable as they are too heavy for takeoff at high bases and have poor climb rates. One might think that using twin-engine helicopters may reduce risk. Quite the contrary. The EC-155 twin-engine helicopter is the only option that is close to adequate given its performance stats. But the wheel landing gear is not suitable for rugged terrain and interferes with the stinger mount. The stinger magnetometer mount has proven to be the safest solution. Not having something hanging below the helicopter reduces the risk of wire or ground strike. Modern compensation tools make this configuration, from a geophysical point of view, much better than the slung bird option as well. Pilot training should be done using a pilot with previous experience to train the new pilot for up to 10 hours of online training. If this is not practical, one can consider using a computer-based simulator. Careful post-flight monitoring of flight statistics can help to improve pilot capability and highlight weaknesses for possible further training. Weather is one of the major risk factors in the mountains. This can be mitigated by positioning the aircraft and base of operations in the project block. This is usually not possible due to the remoteness of the flight blocks and their inherent high altitude. A remote weather station with a camera pointed at the highest peak, strategically placed in the flight block, can mitigate much of the weather risk, i.e., the pilot knows what to expect before taking off. The remote weather station offers real-time data on wind speed and direction, gust intensity at ground level, temperature, dew point, i.e., likelihood of sudden fog, and pressure. The camera offers a real look at the cloud conditions. There are several, now quite good, public weather monitoring internet sites. Consulting these sites before flight will reduce risk. We use a site called Windy to help with flight planning. Pre-project logistical scouting is essential to guarantee safe and comfortable accommodation, food, and water for the crew and a safe, secure landing and fueling site for the helicopter. Establishing good relations with the community and its leaders before arrival with the helicopter is vital to the safe operation of the survey. This image is part of a typical field logistical report. Several sites may be visited to choose the best and most secure one. Reconnaissance flights are vital for mitigating the risk of encountering obstacles. This image shows very dense reconnaissance lines in purple due to the abundance of infrastructure in the area. The location of obstacles and their heights are noted. The green lines are the planned flight lines. In the blow-up, you can see that some of the obstacles are as high as 300 feet or 100 meters. These pose a real risk if the flight plan calls for mean terrain clearances below 100 meters. These maps are used during the flight planning stage and during the pre-flight safety briefing, and may result in changes to the flight plan. Building a risk register will help mitigate risk as it draws attention to hazards and forces development of mitigation strategies. These risks come out of the pre-project logistical report, pre-project multi-stakeholder safety meetings, and reconnaissance flights. Fatigue management is essential and is part of the job safety plan. Recognized issues must be mitigated to reduce risk. Crew rotation is a key part of fatigue management, as well as good accommodation, food, and communications. Flight planning is a key tool in mitigating risk. This starts with calculating a drape map developed using the available digital terrain and the performance characteristics of the aircraft, especially climb and descent rates for the area. There must be careful consideration of planned fuel load, fuel consumption, and thus flight time to safely navigate at the planned altitude of the survey. Flight planning must consider the ferry distance and the time on each line and turn, as well as planned speed and fuel load. Using this data, flight lines may be calculated, ensuring that the flight will bring the aircraft home with sufficient fuel reserves. The plan for the first production flight is always very conservative about fuel consumption, and as the project goes on, experience may allow for longer flights. It is important that each line is planned and the pilot follows the plan. Any seat of the pants changes to the flight plan always increases risk. If the plan cannot be completed due to weather or other situations, the pilot must return to base rather than inventing a new plan. Survey flying in the mountains at a constant velocity is not practical or safe. The safer strategy is as follows. Flying in the low, flatter areas as fast as reasonable allows the aircraft to build up momentum to be traded for climb rate as one approaches the climb. The aircraft slows down as it climbs, and then when the aircraft passes over the peak, the pilot descends slowly with tail down instead of nose down to avoid passing the velocity never exceed limit. If on the climb the aircraft starts to go too slow, the pilot will break away and circle around, picking up speed and starting further up the mountain. This technique produces a safer quality drape. Monitoring in-flight characteristics is essential for mitigating risk. For example, a pilot may be flying too low or too slow, or may be returning to base with too little fuel. The image presented is a map of the altitude of the aircraft and is plotted after every flight and shared with all stakeholders using the New-Sense dashboard application in real time. Aircraft ground speed is also monitored in a similar way. Areas where the pilot is tending to fly below preset thresholds may be easily monitored, and habits that are risky can be mitigated. A table of key statistics is also presented on the dashboard for daily review. Start and end fuel load is one of the key parameters monitored. You will note that the first flight fuel load was lower than subsequent flights. Fuel load was adjusted after the first flight based on the performance of the aircraft during that flight. Position following of both aircraft and ground vehicles will help search and rescue operations if there is an accident. Stakeholder integration and transparency is vital for recognizing risks on a timely basis. The more people that are looking at the behavior of the crew and equipment, the sooner situations can be mitigated. The New-Sense client dashboard provides summarized, at a glance, up to the minute views of many aspects of the project's status, safety, and progress, as well as the ability, with a click or two, to see highly detailed results, statistics, preliminary grids, and monitor safety parameters. Each icon is a gateway to vital information such as weather, flight planning, vehicle following, emergency response plan, flight statistics, etc. All stakeholders are thus integrated into the project, providing enhanced vigilance and thus safer operations. Both the Emergency Response Plan and Job Safety Plan are available to all on the dashboard, as well as the Emergency Call-Out Plan. Both the emergency. Thank you for listening to this review of risk and mitigation strategies for improving safety for airborne geophysical surveys in mountainous terrain.